Lauren Necochea, how are you?
I'm great. It's great to be here, Matt.
It's great to have you back. You and I kicked off with like a quick 30, it was supposed to be a quick 30-minute episode a couple weeks ago, and we got nowhere in 30 minutes. Like we got hung up on property tax.
Deep into property taxes.
And I think obviously that's something that we need to do, like to flush out issues. But I instantly was like, okay, we'll come back because we really didn't make it very far as like what the Democratic platform is in Idaho and what you guys are trying to do. I was having a conversation with somebody this morning, Luke Mayville, in fact, and that episode will go out. But I was having a conversation with Luke, and he was talking about the value of citizen-led initiatives. And I was like, well, what are things, and we were just chatting before, and I'm like, well, what are things that, this is classically used for? Because I'm not like a citizen initiative thing. And he said, well, look, consider the grocery tax. And I'm like, oh, and he's like, now look, everybody talks about the grocery tax. Everybody talks about how they want to get rid of it, but it never actually happens. Like it never actually goes away. And he was like, that's not like, we haven't run a citizen initiative for that, but it's something where the majority of people likely would agree with repealing a grocery tax. For some reason, the legislature just never does it. And that's something that the citizen initiative is valuable for in the event that the, population of Idaho wants to go after it. But that got me thinking. It was like, grocery tax is a big thing. Like, why aren't we going after the grocery tax?
That's a great example. I think I've even brought a personal bill. I have voted during my time on the House Revenue and Taxation Committee to introduce grocery tax repeal bills multiple times, and they'll get an introduction, but we never seem to get to a full hearing. And it's just simply because the GOP leadership does not see that as their preferred tax cut. The grocery taxes are something that really hit people who work paycheck to paycheck the hardest, people in middle class families, to use the term regressive. Sales tax on groceries, just like sales tax on anything else, hits people harder when you have a more modest income or just a regular middle class income. When you make a lot of money, sales tax is not something you notice as much. What you notice is income tax because you have more income. And that seems to be the tax that the Republicans always want to focus on. So that's why the income tax keeps coming down to now it's 5 point something, whereas sales tax is 6%. So when you go to the grocery store and you buy your milk, your eggs, your diapers, your medicine, these necessities, you pay a higher tax rate just to buy necessities than someone who makes $1 million a year or a corporation makes in profits than what they pay on those profits or income.
A friend of mine, a kind of mentor of mine years ago, we were talking about the gas tax, and I was like, well, I mean, if you're driving on the road, that's like you should just pay a tax, right? Like I didn't understand his problem. He's like, it's not a great idea. And he actually told me that he introduced the idea of the consumer tax. Like, look, the consumption taxes are difficult because say you spend $5,000 a year on groceries, right? Mm-hmm. And you spend $5,000 a year on groceries, and whether or not you make like $100,000 or whether you make like $20,000. And we're like, okay. He was like, you probably squeak out a little bit more if you're making substantially less, rein in your budget, buy different quality things, decrease quality, fine. He said, but the bottom line is you're going to be spending roughly around, let's say $5,000. Now, if you have a 6% sales tax, that's roughly $300 annually. And I said, we were talking about gas, but in this case, it's like, okay, that makes sense to me. So you have $300. So you're paying the $300 tax whether you make $20,000 or whether you make $100,000. Now, if you're making $100,000, the $300 is 0.3% of your overall income. If you're making $20,000, that's like 1.5% of your income. Yeah. And that's where you get this big disparity, which is, hey, this is a substantial jump when you make less money. And that's why, am I getting this right? Like why people frown on consumption taxes in general?
You're getting it 100% right. And that's the sum of all the taxes in Idaho. If you add up what people across the income spectrum pay in property tax, sales tax, and income tax, it comes out upside down. The people at the very top, the top 1%, they're paying less of their income in state and local taxes than what the people at the bottom are paying. And there's an organization called the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy that kind of calculates this and looks at state tax structures yearly, and it's been consistent, but it's gotten worse in recent years in Idaho because in this century they've only increased the sales tax, and while they keep cutting the income tax. And we've seen, of course, property taxes go up for a lot of reasons, but one of them is that schools are increasingly dependent on those voter passed levies and bonds just to keep the lights on and just to have buildings, because state funding is inadequate just for those basic functions.
Gotcha. I had a quick question for you, and again, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole with property tax, but I had a quick question after we finished. Okay, so the homeowner's exemption as it stands right now is like the first $125,000 or $150,000 worth of value. Let's say it's $150,000, just for argument's sake. Okay. That $150,000 focuses on like the first $150,000 of value. So if you have a house that's worth $200,000, you're only paying $50,000. You're assessed at you pay your $50,000. If you have a home that's $1 million, you're only going to pay property tax on the $850,000 delta, right? And you had articulated that you didn't like that because it essentially shifted the tax burden from residential, I think, to commercial. I'm not 100%. Yeah, something of that nature, correct?
Yeah. What I didn't like was that we used to have that exemption used to go up in value when home prices went up. And then in 2016, Republicans, with a few Republicans voted with the Democrats against this change, but they said, no, we're not going to let that keep going up when home values go up. We're going to cap it. And they capped it at 100,000. And then they've let it kind of inch up to 125 after a few years, and then 150 when there was this enormous outcry about property taxes because people were seeing huge increases. But every year the tax commission does an analysis where they say what would the value of that home exemption be now, and it was up to 225,000. So homeowners have lost a lot of value of their exemption. It's been taken away because that cap is in place.
Gotcha.
Not adjusting as home values go up.
Now, I thought about that for like a week, and I was like, okay, what? So first off, like if we look at three categories, we look at somebody with a very high value home, let's say $1 million. And then we look at somebody with a lower value home, say, $200,000. And then we look at somebody with no home, $0,000, right? They're just paying rent. The person you don't care about footing the bill for property tax, that's the $1 million person, right? The person with the lower property tax is protected by a much wider margin, right? If my house is worth, say, $300,000 and the exemption is $150,000, then half of my property tax is wiped out. I don't care about wiping out half the property tax for the $1 million guy, right? And, the renter is just paying rent, right? So my question essentially was, okay, is there an issue actually with having a homeowner's exemption that goes up not automatically with values, but instead is voted on by the legislature? Is that the problem where it's like, okay, can we just increase this faster? Like if they got it up more, would you say like, okay, this is fine?
Totally. I think the problem is that the Republicans in leadership, not Republican vote. I think the Republican voters have the same values that you just expressed, and that's in line with mine. Like if you want to have a $1 million, $2 million house, that's great, but we're not going to subsidize your property taxes to the same extent. Enjoy your pool, but you don't get the same level of protection because we want to promote homeownership and we want it to be attainable for people. But Republicans in leadership have become kind of the gatekeepers of keeping it low, keeping it artificially low, keeping it below what it would have been.
Gotcha.
And then they use that as because as I said the last time we talked, this isn't a Democrat and Republican thing when you go out into communities, because Republican county commissioners want the same thing that I want when they want to go back to that. The adjusted property tax exemption. But then now it becomes a kind of a bargaining chip. And then we do have another piece in it for low fixed income seniors. We have a property tax reduction program where state funds come in and help you pay. But what they did a few years ago as part of a big bill that was supposed to, this was the bill.
When you say they, a few years,
the Republican supermajority, and it came out of the House, and it was just kind of announced. And that's the way the tax bills happen. It's not. And as a committee member, I'm not asked, what I think.
Sure.
It's just, this is the bill. This will be the bill to reduce property taxes. So if you don't like this bill, there's not going to be any other bill, and we're going to be able to say you didn't vote to cut property taxes. And then in part of this bill, they put some extra restrictions around the property tax reduction program that was going to kick some people off if their home value was above the median. And I said, look, in Ada County, I know I have people in my neighborhood a neighborhood that's just gotten really hot, and if you could still have a modest home and some seniors living there who didn't choose to have all these other people move in around them, but now their home value is up. Now they're not going to now they're no longer eligible, even though they're income eligible for property tax assistance. They're going to get kicked out of this program. And how can we be kicking people off of property tax assistance as part of a bill that's supposed to reduce property taxes? So I got up, I said that debate. Republicans, I think it was near a party line vote on this bill. And then next year, one of my colleagues comes back and says, my constituents got kicked out of the property tax reduction program. They just wanted to shake him by the shoulders and say, didn't you hear my debate?
Gotcha.
This is what was going to happen. This was in the bill because I think the main architect behind the bill, the now House Speaker, had some feelings about something, and he uses his sway to construct things the way he wants it, and then says it's this bill or the highway. And then so anyway, my colleague has the sway that I didn't have as a Democrat to say, hey, we need to get these people back in, and so we did make a fix and got some of the people back in, but there's not really robust debate when it comes to tax policy. It kind of gets constructed behind closed doors, and then people get told, this is the bill.
Gotcha. Now, going back to the grocery bill then. So the bottom line is, this is something that disproportionately as a percentage of income affects lower end people, right? Lower income people, not lower end, but lower income people. And again, it's something that is just not popular to talk about. Whereas, obviously property tax cuts or income tax cuts are more relevant. Are there other things like this, like consumption taxes that are kind of like snuck in there that are disproportionately affecting, lower or middle class Idahoans?
Probably some of our, the so-called sin taxes, like the tobacco tax, potentially, which we haven't looked at in a while. There isn't. I wish there were more attention paid to this kind of equality. And how do we make sure we're not taxing people into poverty? If people are working on the edge, paycheck to paycheck, don't have big wages, are dealing with really high cost of putting a roof over your head, can we not tax them into poverty? And this is a value that I think is shared as a bipartisan value. Like the earned income tax credit is very popular, and I know Republicans in Congress have championed that, but we can't get those types of things into our tax code here. We got a very small increase in the child tax credit a few years ago because it was part of a big bill that was redefining how we calculate your taxable income, and it was going to increase income taxes on families with a lot of kids. And so they made a little jump in the child tax credit just so they would be able to say, and actually I was part of a kind of a tax research group that was part of elevating that. Look, this bill you've got that's you are calling a tax cut bill is actually going to raise taxes on families with a lot of kids. And so they increased the amount of Idaho's child tax credit. But it is, if you have to be making a certain amount of money to get the full value of the credit because it's not refundable, unlike, the school voucher bill that they want to do. And
so it was an actual, like, if you qualify for $5,000 of refund, but you've only paid in $3,000, then you only get your $3,000.
Then you only get that. So
can I ask you something? I don't mean to interrupt. I was really confused by that with when I was talking to Senator Dan Hartog. She's like, "This is a refundable tax credit." I'm like, "Okay, but if I don't make the money, if I don't pay taxes, like I don't get paid for doing this podcast. Okay. Right. I've been at it a while. So like my income tax based on this podcast, $0. Okay. So but I would still qualify presumably for that tax credit. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I would literally just get a check from other Idahoans, like, thank you for the money.
Yes.
And then I go on my merry way.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yes. And that works more. I mean, that's going to be much more common in the voucher scenario because those have big dollars attached to them, 5,000 versus our child tax credit is, I can't remember, a few hundred.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So bottom line is some of the sin taxes, though, alcohol. Did you follow any of the any of the brouhaha around the liquor licenses last year? Because that got super hot. And then we have places like McCall or like these resort style towns that swell in population, and obviously the resort months, and then drop. The liquor licenses there are coveted, right? And people design their entire business model around perhaps acquiring like a $300,000 liquor license. And they're like, okay, this is the return we can get, and it's going to take this many years to pay this off and make sense, blah, blah, blah. Like, what do we do with that? Because that's a really tricky one. Like, nobody wins. If you open up the liquor licenses, you instantly devalue the business that took out loans to purchase these very few. Like, it's a mess.
It is. It's a mess. And we got ourselves into this mess, I think, and let it happen. And it is tricky. And it's also bonkers, right? Because then it creates this huge barrier to entry for anyone wanting to, start their own bar, start a restaurant and serve alcohol. Now you've got this huge price ticket, if you can even get a liquor license. And so it makes that market less competitive. But then, as you said, some people count on and invested in it, or saw it as, for some people, this is like their nest egg. It's part of their savings plan. It's part of how they're going to fund their retirement. And so you don't want to pull the rug out from under people. I mean, and not being a deep expert in it, I do think we need to gradually get more liquor license out there, and gradually over time, so that people don't see an instant drop in the liquor license that they've invested in, but that also so that we don't still have this system 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now.
Gotcha. Yeah, the Star Merc was in a bad spot too, because they had been the one with the state approved liquor license, and then the Star got big enough that they were going to open their own, state liquor store. And Star Merc obviously was like, wait a minute, like we footed the bill for this. Like, this is part of our business model. Like, everything is designed around price of goods that we can sell, and this is one of those key pieces. Yeah, that's a tricky one. But I believe they got grandfathered in, correct?
I would believe you. That sounds right.
Believe me. I wouldn't believe me. I'm an idiot. I don't know any of these things. There are a couple other big, did you see the bill that Representative Hill brought forward recently that was restricting statewide? So in West Ada is a neutral school district, right? So in West Ada, you cannot have any flag other than the Idaho flag or United States flag. A lot of things like that. The school counselors are, like, there is no action you can take with somebody who's experienced gender dysphoria or something like that in the absence of parental consent. Like, you can't just like whisk a kid off, which I know a lot of people are worried about, but that just doesn't exist in West Ada. But statewide, there's no state bill. West Ada put these, are they policies? They're not ordinances. Policy. Let's just call it policy, because they don't make laws. They just make policies. And statewide, though, Representative Hill brought a similar bill forward regarding the flag, which is like, okay, you can only fly, I think it's the American flag and Idaho flag. And there was a large outcry from people, and I think he brought this last year as well. People got really upset. They're like, hey, these LGBTQ kids that we have at our school are being assaulted like daily, and like, we need this flag to like help support them. What do you think about that? Because although we are dealing with larger things in the state, obviously every day, like, this is not the most important thing, but it is one of those big differentiating factors, at least classically, that people look at between the Democrat and Republican Party.
Yeah, I think it's a distraction, as you said, from real things that.
When you say it's a distraction, what's it?
It's bringing a statewide law about what flag you can have in a classroom feels. I would lump it together with kind of this culture war stuff that distracts people from, do they have access to affordable health care? Can they get a roof over their head affordably? Do they have access to good jobs with good wages? Can they get, training in nursing, welding, or whatever they want to do to advance their career? So I think, these are the bills that I don't think actually really help anyone. And I just read a little bit of the news about that bill, and Representative Hill thinks it's going to inspire patriotism, and that's his reason behind it. That doesn't add up. That doesn't make sense to me. We have the American flags are there flying in front of the schools, and we don't need to change that. We can keep that. But I also don't think we need a state law about this. West Ada made a policy. Why does the state have to be cramming everything down, the local school district's throats, when that might not be what a particular community wants? And
Right.
you know?
Right. You certainly, especially with like the library bill, that was the argument, which is like, look, let school districts have their place. What there is a crisis though in faith of the public education, and in especially states like Idaho. And a lot of people, and again, in West Ada, they're already ahead of this, right? Which is unfortunate because although there may be other districts in the area that don't have similar policies to West Ada gets lumped into it. And people don't realize that it is really working hard to, engage in just straightforward, bland, like 3 R's. I'm trying to reading, writing, arithmetic, like we're trying to get after it, right? But there are a lot of people who feel like flying the LGBTQ flag in a public education setting is one, tacit approval and agreement with the, for instance, existence of people who were born a man and then, or born a man and feel that they are a woman, right? And flying that flag is like essentially tacit affirmation of, yes, we agree with you. And those, a lot of those people are saying, using that type of thing as a reason why they feel that school choice should be relevant and be discussed. Because like, this is not, these schools are putting forth a political position and this is not the place for it. And even if they are even if you're saying this is the place for it and this is the flag that they're flying, and this is their political position, the political position being that like, we affirm all of the beliefs within this community. They're like, this is not reflecting my values. So like, what do we do about that? Because I do know that people feel very strongly about that kind of thing, which is like, look, if my kid goes to school, I don't want, like, can we just reading, writing, arithmetic? Like we don't need a flag. Like, and we don't even all agree. Yeah. One funny thing, it's not funny, but it's kind of funny. Like, did you ever see that movie Milk? It was the first openly gay city council member
About
of San
Harvey
Francisco.
Milk.
Yes,
Back when it came out. So don't quiz me on the details.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I thought it was a pretty well done. He ended up getting like assassinated in his office. It was a really sad story.
Yeah.
But what I found interesting about it is obviously like profound story of somebody like standing up for what they believe in. Great, that's American. And also, it's like it seemed so unrealistic to me because like, wait, this happened. Like this was a thing. It was like, okay, people can be gay. Like, okay. And it's almost like we've kind of moved on past that. And now we have this one giant flag that lumps everyone together. And it's like, well, do they all share the same ideas? Like one thing that I've always found curious, like you have LGB, right? Okay. I understand what that means. But then you go to like Q and T and plus, and it's like, wait, do the L and the G and the B like all agree with the T? And like, are they all on the same? And then you have this flag that is again lumping them all together. And they're, people are like, wait, like that has nothing to do with us. Like, if I'm a gay guy, that doesn't mean I agree with all of these other things. A little bit of conflict. It was anyway. So yeah. What do we do about those? What do we do about those parents that are like, look, this is more of a political position, an affirmation in something that I don't believe in?
Yeah. I mean, I don't see it as a political statement. I think a pride flag says, however you identify, I accept you as you are. So it's a way of just saying that, this is a safe space. It doesn't, I don't know how it's political. It's not a Republican or a Democrat, like a flag. If someone, like if political propaganda with a party or a stance on a legislation or if some sort of political view would be different than just saying, signaling with a pride flag on your desk that, if you're a gay kid and like, that's okay. I think that's okay. It's okay for you to be that way. And to me, it's not about a belief. It's just saying I accept you as you are. I mean, there are gay people, whether you believe in them or not, or approve of someone being gay,
sure.
right?
Sure.
And so all that message is that, it's okay. It's okay to be who you are around me, full stop. And we wouldn't want other kinds of law, would we want a law saying you couldn't have a photo of George W. Bush, or President Trump in the classroom, or another, partisan political figure? No, we wouldn't want to do that. I don't think.
But I don't think it's
part of learning about the world.
I don't think the analogy of a picture of a past or present president, analogous to displaying a pride flag is like really a fair analogy, right? Even in what the articulation is. And again, I hear your articulation, which is saying, hey, this is just the school saying that like, we accept you for who you are, right? And that to me, again, like I meet gay people all the time. It's like, I have no problem with you, right? Like I wouldn't disagree with someone saying like, well, you should accept gay. Okay, great. We should all accept gay people. That's fine. But is that a statement that public schools should be making?
I mean, the job of public schools is to serve everybody. So it's to teach gay kids as well as straight kids. And so making sure gay kids know that they come in the door. I mean, we have like the problem, you brought up the Harvey Milk example. The problem we have is not, I mean, I think it's a very small minority of parents who are worried about a rainbow flag in a classroom. I think a lot of parents are and really worried about, and that's keeping them up at night. I think parents of gay kids are very worried that their kid could be bullied, that they could face the kinds of violence that we've seen. Because we've seen it. We've seen gay people be targeted and even murdered for being gay. And so I think making the statement that, all are welcome here and all are accepted here. And it's a way of saying we're not going to bully each other. We're not going to bully our fellow students. And that's all there is. It's not telling you who you need to vote for or it's not a political statement. It's not telling you how to worship, what kind of religion you should be. Which is a whole other thing that people want to put in the classroom. I think we should have that separation. So I think if I were the parent of a gay kid, I would be more worried about, potential violence and bullying against them. And then I think any parent should be worried about a flag with a rainbow on it. Makes
sense. I think violence and bullying should be like addressed just categorically though, right? Right. And I'm not saying like carve out, like I understand what you're saying. It seems odd to me though, that it's like, okay, we have violence against this group, so we should have a flag, when it's like, shouldn't we be taking a movement to stop violence categorically? Because like people get murdered that are heterosexual, right? Like people get bullied that are just normal straight kids that are just getting bullied, right? And it's whatever the reason somebody gets bullied, be it they're small or they have funny hair or they're, too big and whatever their hairstyle is, like none of that really matters, right? In my mind, which is, okay, we should just stop bullying. We should stop murder, right? Like that's a broader, so aligning, and I get what you're saying, which is like, okay, you might have a higher propensity of violence or discrimination or bullying against this particular group. I get that. I would, it seems like a carve out to me for this particular thing when it's like, okay, but a school flying flag isn't going to stop people from being bullied, right? Like that's not a solution. And it disgusts me to imagine a poor kid of any orientation getting bullied. Like it boils my blood. Like, and I've interacted with bullies in my life and I just want to kill them. Like I've actually, believe it or not, I've never been in a fight. I have never been, the only person who's ever punched me, it was my friend. He had a couple beers, too many. And
I've never been in a fight
We're still best friends. Well, that makes two of us then, except for my best friend. So like, I just think that it's like, okay, but is that flag accomplishing that goal? That's what I get worried about, that the flag is actually a distraction from the larger problem of like, okay, if we have kids that are getting bullied, if we have kids that are getting beat up, the flag is not going to fix this. But people cling on to the flag as like, we need to have this flag to address bullying. And it's like, that kid who's a bully doesn't care about that flag.
Well, why do we need a state law tearing the flags down? Like, can we just let people be?
No, but what I'm saying is, like,
let schools
we should, if we are in this problem, like, why are we addressing it with a flag or defending a flag saying this flag is addressing it? Like, the flag's not going to address it. If you got a bully or somebody who dislikes gay people, putting a flag in the classroom, like, I'm all for fixing the bullying thing. Like, how do we do that?
Well, and my Democratic colleague had to push really hard, but she got through a bill to require every school district to have a bullying plan, seen as, especially as, I mean, in social media was just also a new component that no one was used to, a decade ago, and adds a whole nother layer of complexity to the bullying problem and what it's doing to kids' mental health and all of that.
It's brutal. It's really rough. Did you see that Lava Ridge got axed by Trump?
I did. I heard that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that a good thing?
I
I will tell you, just for my sake, just put it out
Yeah.
there. I was excited because I thought that the utilization, that neglecting the sentiment of native Idahoans, I thought that was wrong. It was like, look, I don't know anything about windmills. I don't know anything about generating power,
Yeah.
to be clear.
Yeah.
But to hear everyone from the bottom up saying like no one in Idaho wanted this, that really broke my heart. So I was happy
Yeah.
just from the standpoint, it's like, okay, nobody in Idaho wanted this. This was distinctly affecting Idaho and benefiting a different state. Like, there we go.
Yeah. And the entire Democratic caucus joined in supporting a resolution against that specific project. And it was close to, the Minidoka, that site of where the Japanese internment camp. It was kind of a sacred special space that deserved special acknowledgement. And we do have to be very careful. What I don't want to see in the future is no wind and solar projects approved ever again, because I think we can just, the writing on the wall is we need more energy. We need cheaper energy. And there are some, and we need renewable sources of it, or we're going to run out, right? We're using, we use electricity to do things that we didn't use electricity to do, 30, 40
I don't
years
think
ago.
you have to
justify.
I don't think you have to justify electrical usage. Like, look at everything in here. Like,
Everything in everything.
everything's glowing and
Yes.
like,
right.
yeah.
And so what I'm concerned about, and what I'm concerned about was part of the motivation of that is just a general disdain for any sort of wind and solar projects, because it's seen as, something that environmental support, and like we got to come together. And these are cheaper ways of generating energy. And I think that's the long game. And we want to be out in front of it as a nation to meet our energy needs, and we can't just say, not in my backyard every time. We have to be serious. And I think, look at, okay, where can we build these things to produce the energy we need within the United States? So we know we're not dependent on anybody else. And we can be energy secure. Like, where can we build these things? So I don't want that to get lost in the conversation, even though that project, I think, was ill-advised.
What do we do? And again, you're talking like broad nation. And again, Matt can barely conceptualize like my little like house. I can't. But within the state of Idaho, how do we address this? Because hydropower, like Idaho is one of the biggest producers of green energy in the country. Mm-hmm. And we have an incredible amount of hydropower. Some people, especially with like the lower four Snake River dams, they articulate that it's like, okay, but these dams generate power in months when Idaho's not consuming the most power. They generate the most power in May. We don't consume the most power until like late July and August. So this power gets sold at a loss through Bonneville Power Company to other states like Washington and California. And obviously the environmental impacts with the salmon, and then you have, the wheat growers up north that are shipping via barge, like all of these different things. So like, what do we do to solve the energy problem and maintain lower costs? Because energy costs in Idaho are very low compared to other places. It's like one of our great secrets here that we have access to cheap energy, and God bless every second of it. But what do we do to maintain that? Because those costs are increasing. I think like Idaho Power went up 8% or something last year. And again, it's not Idaho Power like lining its pockets, right? Like, yeah, the Idaho Power has to stay solvent, but like we have these cost of generation and distributions that keep going up. Like, how do we address that?
It's exactly why we have to diversify. It's exactly why we have to find, okay, if not here, where can we build wind and solar so that we have enough energy? And I think I do get the sense from Idaho Power that they want to, look at these new things. And because, like you said, in July and August, there is a lot of strain on our grid. And we saw this in Boise last year where some people got their power turned off. And that's unpleasant. Nobody likes that. Nobody wants that. So how do we, invest in a good power grid? We don't want to see what's, the kinds of things that happened in Texas where people went long stretches without power. So
was that in the winter though?
Yeah.
We don't want to see that.
We don't want to see that.
No, but wait, do we have like wintertime power? They lost like their power grid though, didn't they?
Yeah. I think that, I mean, that's more of an issue, I think, of just the integrity of the power grid
Right.
and the infrastructure. But it's dire. Things are bad when we don't have electricity. So let's get out in front of it and let's diversify. And we just can't say we hate this type, we hate this type of energy because of we can't get ideological about it.
Well, yeah, I agree with you, right? Like if it makes sense, it makes sense. But the thing that I thought was really an injustice of Lava Ridge was like, okay, it's not, I mean, Jerome has windmills. It's not like Jerome doesn't have windmills, but it was a project that was being utilized for, existing ranch operations, bordering different properties right above the aquifer near, like historic sites. And nobody wanted it. So it's kind of like, okay, we have a essentially like localized, not review, but a localized where they give feedback, local feedback.
Yeah.
Right. You get to have your voice heard.
Yeah.
Right. And everybody's like, don't do this, please. It's like county commissioners, mayors, citizens, all the way
of
up.
both parties.
Right. So I don't think this was necessarily, and perhaps people could make the argument there was an ideological, like no, but it was more of, look, we just said not here. We said we don't like this here. It's not like Jerome doesn't have a single windmill. So like I understand you're saying we have to diversify, but like in practical terms, like do we rebuild Teton Dam? Like do we focus more on hydro? Do we pump more like cloud seeding programs so we get more hydro water in existing infrastructure?
I don't know that we get more mileage out of more cloud seeding. I don't know that that's a question. I'm just going to go back to, we have to say, okay, if not here, where are the communities that say, hey, let's do this here. We like the jobs. We think this area is good for it. Let's do it here and then do it there. And I think building a new dam is really, really expensive compared to these other, solar and wind they're just going to be cheaper. And they keep this. It's a kind of technology that gets cheaper and cheaper with time as it gets better. And so it just makes sense. I went to a talk by, I can't remember his name, but it was a prominent kind of expert in the environment and climate readiness. And he was saying, the good news is that it's cheaper to do these things that are better for the environment, that are going to mean, burning less fossil fuel and less pollution and less global warming. These things are going to be cheaper. They're going to be the better options for business and to keep the economy growing. And so that was like really good news to hear, that we can have our cake and eat it too. We can pursue these new renewable sources and it's going to be cheaper and better for business, better for customers, and better for the environment.
I like all of those things.
Yeah.
What do you think about nuclear though? Because this is a big one where it's kind of like you don't have to deal with load shifting. Obviously the wind is not always blowing, the sun is not always shining, so you have to take advantage of the power source. So not only do you need the power generation mechanism, but you need a storage. So you shift all these different things. Like where does that fit into kind of your broader picture? Because I had Senator Risch on, who was talking about he's very much a fan of nuclear power, and they're scaling down these nuclear sites to like 40 acres or something like that, I think he said, and that would provide an enormous amount of power. And classically, I have heard some people that are very large proponents of, say, quote, green energy with the solar and wind, very much against nuclear, but nuclear seems to be like the 800-pound gorilla in the room, where it's like, we can have really solve this, just hit this nail with this hammer and like we're done, like just install the nucler.
Yeah. And I think, at INL here in Idaho, we're developing a lot of that cutting edge technology.
We were the originals. Like wasn't Arco the first atomic city that was powered off, nuclear energy?
I think that's right.
I think that's right. I think that's accurate. So again, like, does that fit? Do you view that as, shoulder to shoulder with things like solar panels and wind, or do you think that we should?
I'm in all of the above. I think some of these things are easier to kind of flip the switch and get going faster. We're farther along than the nuclear piece of just, mass production and getting that out there. But I think it's in all of the above.
Gotcha. One more thing. Because I was talking about it this morning, what do you think about the limiting the citizens initiative to make it instead of a 50% threshold to pass, up to a 60% threshold to pass?
I think this is an enormous power grab by the legislature that doesn't make any sense. And for any Idaho voter. And the Idaho legislature, they have the power to do anything they want to do. And if a citizen initiative comes and they don't like it, they can overturn it the next day in the blink of an eye. And a couple years ago, actually, with the education funding initiative, they undid the initiative before the voters even voted. They called a special session and we passed a bill. I was part of it. I was there. We passed a bill to increase education funding and cut taxes and rewrite the tax code for, I think it was a couple days after the initiative would have taken effect. So it just put this repeal on autopilot. So in this context, where the legislature has a supermajority of a single party, they have 85% of the seats, one party. They can do anything they want to do. They can repeal any citizen initiative that they want to appeal. Why do they keep year after year making it harder and harder? It's really just because it makes them look bad when the citizens get together and take action on things they haven't done. It looked bad back in the late 70s and into about the early 80s when a citizen-led initiative passed that personal property or the homeowners property tax exemption that we've been discussing. That was passed by the voters. Cut to some years later, the voters passed term limits, and then the legislature immediately undid that one, and then they look bad for doing that. Right?
Wait, tell me about the term limit. I'm not familiar.
There was a citizen, there was a ballot initiative to put term limits on the Idaho legislature, and then the Idaho legislature came to town and undid it.
When was that?
Oh gosh. I don't know if it was the 80s or 90s.
Okay, so at some time in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a citizen-led initiative that did in fact pass and make a law to install term limits on the Idaho legislature. That passes in like November, presumably. The Idaho legislature rolls into town like 45 days later, and they're like, that thing you guys wanted that like the majority of you voted for, yeah, we're not doing that. And they voted to out it.
Yeah. Because they have all of the power to undo any citizen-led initiative. They have all of the power. So why are they so squirrely about it and so afraid of the voters? Because it makes them look bad. They can still get the outcome they want, but it makes them look bad when they come to town and undo term limits. We talked a little bit, I think maybe before we started rolling, about the referendum process. But back in about 2012, there was a slew of education reform bills that included mandated online classes. So to graduate from high school, you had to take you couldn't take these classes in the classroom with the teacher. You had to take a certain number of classes online, purely online. Now, this is pre-pandemic days.
Yeah, 2012. That was not like we didn't even have Zoom.
Right. Can you imagine the legislature trying to pass that now with how everybody feels about, virtual learning? They would not have tried that now. But the voters in their wisdom said, we don't like this. We want teachers in schools with our students. And that was part of kind of three bills. And they all got overturned
through citizens' initiative.
Wow. Through referenda.
So
okay. It was three.
So the 2012 session sees these three bills get passed in the legislature, and like they terminated in like early April, and then the citizens stand up. They're like, these are terrible. Like, what are they doing? And so they literally get a referendum lined up, similar process, collecting signatures, get it on the ballot, and then it was majority rules.
They repeal them, and it's really since that moment that the GOP supermajority has just been chipping away at the ballot initiative rights. So back then at that time, you needed to reach a certain number of voters, I think 6% of the voters who voted in the last election, which is still, it's a big hurdle collecting these signatures. I mean, these volunteers work hard. They go out and stand in front of the library. It's really hard work. And so then the legislature said, no, you need to pass them in 18 districts now, just to make it even harder. And they said this under the guise of, well, this is, so that rural people have a voice. Well, do you know what? Do you know how hard it is if you're a rural voter to hit 18 legislative districts? Yeah. It makes it much harder for the rural folks than someone living in a city to meet this, but it was all smoke and mirrors because all they did was that this thing made them look really bad. And so they didn't like it. And so it's almost, I think almost every session after, and they didn't like it when we passed Medicaid expansion, with 61% of the vote, and so they just keep bringing bills to chip away. The one bill they brought a few years ago would have increased it from 18 of the 35 districts to you have to meet a threshold of voters signing petitions in all of the districts all over the state. And that's when the Supreme Court kind of gave them the smackdown and said, this is not okay.
This is and again,
power.
I've just got started getting educated on this. And again, I have invited Representative Skog on. I would love to have him come in and understand what his perspective is. But it is really interesting hearing that there constantly exists this tension between our representatives and the masses. And there is a great check and balance with one passing something the other doesn't like and the other taking action against that thing. And we have this push and pull, and that's beautiful. Like, that seems so cool. And I'm not saying that, the 50 versus 60% to get it passed is right or wrong. Like, I don't know anything about it, but I do love that there's a mechanism for both stopping the tyranny of the masses in the legislature. They're like, look, these people are on a bender. Like, we got to stop this nonsense. And they smack down a rule or a law that was passed through initiative. And there's also a referendum where people can say, hey, you passed this thing we don't like. Yeah. And like, let's find out. The Prop 1 has seemed to me to be like an overwhelming affirmation that the process is working. That's like, hey, there was this citizens-led initiative. It was unpopular with the majority of the state. And in fact, the majority of the state voted that they didn't like it and it did not pass. It's like, that doesn't seem like that's broken. It seems like, no, that worked perfectly. It worked, right? Like, you failed to articulate you failed to articulate the problem substantially enough and overwhelmingly enough that people were like, yes, we changed the rules, right? And there you go. Like, that's it. Wow, what a time to be alive.
Yeah. We had one a few years ago that was on horse racing and how you can gamble or not on horse racing. And it was something that the legislature hadn't acted on because of kind of an anti-gambling sentiment. And then there were some interests who wanted to see this law passed. And that was one that was definitely funded by, people who would benefit. And ultimately it did not pass. But
well, there you go.
There are things.
It didn't work.
It's our check on the government. And, I think that's just inherent in any good, strong democracy. You have those checks and balances, even if it's a weak one for us. We have to work really, really hard now that I'm a regular citizen, we have to work really, really hard to get something on the ballot. They make it you need thousands of volunteers doing this stuff.
I really hadn't heard it described that way, that the citizens-led initiative is really a check against the government. I think in Idaho, a lot of people consider checking against the government, taking action against the federal government. But I think we would be foolish to assume that everyone in our state government always has our perspective or our best interest at heart. That's not vilifying any particular person, but it's government, right? Like, that's the way this goes.
It's the way it goes. And the thing is that, one committee chair can hold a bill in a drawer. Just one person, just one legislator can totally put the brakes on something that a majority of people want. And so the people need to have some sort of check on this process, because you can have, and I think this was true to some degree in Medicaid expansion, where I think if we had gotten bills to the floor, we might have been able to pass them. But there are power plays that can happen in the Capitol, where sometimes one person or a few people can just shut something down that a lot of people want. And so this is our check. This is our chance to, as regular people, to have a say. And they get this. They get like what they did with term limits. They get the final say. And so this is just our limited little chance to be a check on the legislature. And if we lose that, I think for generations to come, it will be a big loss.
Lauren, I just realized I wanted to ask you about women's reproductive care, but we're like running low on time. You're going to have to come back again.
I would love to come back.
Let's talk women's reproductive care,
okay.
Because St. Luke's, it's my understanding that St. Luke's health system is actually suing the state of Idaho. And this is like a long explanation, and the federal government or some portion of it is suing Idaho as well. It's a whole big mess, and we got to start. I wanted to ask you about it. We got derailed again, but let's line something up again, and let's keep picking through ideas and different issues, and chatting about them, and we can broadcast and help people understand what the Democratic perspective is on these things.
All right, I would love that.
Awesome, thank you very much.
Thank you.